Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael and we're going to be getting right back into some more Reddit stories. If you enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Now, without further ado, let's begin. This story was created in the Entitled People subreddit by a user named Terrific Moose. The post is entitled Brother Fakes Illness to Milk My Parents of Their Retirement Savings. This is long, but I promise it is worth it. I'll throw a TLDR at the end. So I grew up in a middle-class family in a low-income area. My dad built his dream house there, and even though they could afford to move, they never wanted to. My parents had a tendency to spoil my older brother far more than me, mostly because I was the quiet one who never spoke up. This resulted in my brother getting his way more often than me. Nothing blatant, but it was enough to give him an entitlement complex a mile wide. When my brother was a teenager, he struggled with some serious mental illnesses. These were absolutely legitimate and crippled his ability to function for several years. My parents were obviously very concerned for him, so they willingly paid top dollar for the best psychiatrist and psychologist they could find to help him. By the time I was ready to go to a different city to start university, my brother was at a stage where he was ready to go as well. It was decided that he would go to a university in the same city as me and we would live together. My parents offered to pay for our rent all the way through university, so us flatting together obviously made a lot of financial sense for them. We would have to pay for everything else out of our student loans. Everything was set. We had found a good student flat, settled in, etc. He had a new care team in this new city. Awesome. Unfortunately, my brother had an episode on his first day that resulted in him not going to class. This meant he was removed from his program, compulsory first day, with the option of starting again in the second semester. Now, the obvious, logical, and sensible thing to do in that situation is for my brother to go home while I found a roommate to take the spare bedroom and he could move back up and try again next semester. My brother didn't like that idea. You see, he always hated living at home. He would always whine about how old our house was or how poor our neighborhood looked. Our neighborhood was lovely with a great sense of community, and I always loved it there, but he felt that he deserved better. Next thing we know, his new psychologist has written a letter to my parents stating that it would be a good idea to allow him to stay living in the new city, to allow him to acclimate to his surroundings. My parents followed this advice and allowed him to stay. They replaced his weekly loan amount with an allowance of the same value and thought everything would move forward from there. This worked for a few weeks, but my brother started to hound my parents for more money. You see, he wasn't a student, so in his mind, why should he have to live like a student? No instant noodles and TV dinners for him. He wanted steak and lamb for dinner. He wanted to go to nice restaurants with his friends and go shopping whenever he felt like it. He wanted a new iPhone and a new MacBook because his was slow, etc. My parents eventually gave in and doubled his allowance. The second semester rolls around and my brother hasn't even bothered enrolling. My parents weren't happy, but his psychologist writes him another letter, and so it continues. Fast forward 3 years and I'm graduating with a job offer from my university in my field. The apartment is nice and convenient to my new job, so I continue to live there, only now I pay for my half of the rent and utilities. My brother is still not working or studying and his allowance is now almost equal to my salary. Every time my parents try to force him home, his psychologist writes another letter and my parents' trust in my brother's care team was high. They did save his life after all. By this point, my parents are just paying for his half of the utilities directly on top of his allowance. I suggested to my parents to get a second medical opinion as he had been seeing this psychologist almost weekly for 3 years with no improvement, but my brother flat out refuses. He likes her, she speaks to his soul, whatever that means. About a year and a half after I graduate, our landlord decides to sell the apartment and the new owners want to live there. Normal thing that happens and I'm not too bothered by this. I wanted to take the opportunity to get my own place. I have a serious girlfriend whom I want to eventually marry, so would like my own space that she could one day move into and just generally move on with my adult life. But my parents don't want my brother living on his own just yet, and again, he is refusing to come home. They beg me to stay for just one more year while they figure out an arrangement for him. We got rather short notice to move, so I can understand this, and one more year won't matter too much to me. So apartment hunting we go. My brother goes fully off the entitlement deep end. He will only view apartments well outside of our price range. Anything within budget is either too old or too small or too dark or too ugly. He wants a new modern apartment in an expensive suburb in the heart of the city. His psychologist writes another letter outlining the importance of a comfortable environment for him. My parents cave once again and agree to get his dream apartment for us, but I can't afford half of the new rent. They compromise with me, and I only have to pay the same rent as I was before, which is barely a third of the rent at the new place, mind you. It's a beautiful apartment, so I was okay with the deal even though I wasn't happy. Unfortunately, my brother is now used to getting everything he wants or needs. He starts asking me to pay for more and more of the groceries. Idiot me, thinking that mom and dad had cut down on his allowance now that the rent is so expensive, agreed to take up some of the slack. Big mistake. They were still giving him the same amount. He just wanted more. He starts asking me for more and more things and then whines to mom when I don't give it to him. My parents cave over and over again and get him whatever he wants. New computer, new MacBook, new iPhone, heck, even a car. Up until this point, my parents could afford all of this and somehow still save well for their retirement. My mom was completely honest with me about their finances, as when the time came, the power of attorney would transfer to me, so she wanted me to know where they stood. They were on track for a long, comfortable retirement, but then my dad unfortunately lost his job through very unusual circumstances. His company just disappeared and his boss left the country. This messed my dad up for quite a while, and he decided it was time to kick back and enjoy an early retirement. He was only 2 years short of retirement age anyway. My brother was furious. He would rage about how dad had betrayed him for not continuing to work to fund his lifestyle. He would regularly yell at my mom over the phone, saying that he expects them to continue to support him because he deserves the security of the lifestyle he has earned. I laughed my ass off at that line, which turned into another long fight, but was totally worth it. I knew that without dad's income, my parents couldn't afford the rent where we lived, so I decided to force the issue and moved into my own place. I had hoped that this would result in my brother moving as well, but alas, his psychologist wrote him another letter, and he continued to live there. I moved on with my life, got married, went back to university, bought a house, grown-up stuff. 5 years go by, and I have virtually no contact with my brother. I'm visiting my parents one day, and when I take them out for lunch, my mom breaks down crying because she can't pay. It turns out that my brother had been blackmailing my parents to continue to support him, saying that if they didn't, he'd end up homeless and it would be their fault, etc. He still had the full support of his medical team, and my parents didn't know what to do. He had burned through nearly 20 years worth of retirement savings since I moved out. My parents were both forced to go back to work to try and stretch out their retirement savings. I decide to visit the psychologist myself, only to find out she is one of those tell people what they want to hear so they keep giving me money predatory type psychologists who was enabling my brother because he was a cash cow for her. Our entire family was furious. Turns out my brother had been recovered since his first year living away from home. He was perfectly able to work or study, he just didn't want to, and so she wrote him those bogus letters to let him get away with it. He decided to milk my parents of their savings to fund his lifestyle because he had earned it and they owed him for not giving him what he wanted when he was younger. When confronted about it, he was entirely unapologetic. As far as he is concerned, he was entitled to everything he got and then some. It has been a few years since then, and my parents have completely cut him off. They are surviving, but within a few years, I will probably end up having to support them. I have no issue with this. I'm their son and I'm fortunate enough to be able to do so, but it breaks my dad's heart knowing this. He grew up dirt poor and worked his ass off to provide for us, only to see it all disappear because of my selfish brother. The psychologist had her license suspended after my parents laid a complaint. I don't know if it was temporary or not, but I hope it was permanent. As for my brother, he works a dead-end retail job with a live-in boyfriend who pays for almost everything. He's still an entitled ass, and I only see him during Christmas. I just want to emphasize, my brother had legitimate mental health issues. I do not want to take away from that at all. He just chose to willfully deceive everyone about the severity in order to demand that everyone else give him the life he feels he deserves. And before you ask, no, his mental illness did not contribute towards this attitude. It's not that sort of illness. He's just an entitled dickwad. TLDR, my brother faked the severity of his mental illness to milk my parents of money for over a decade. Now their retirement is in jeopardy and he is still convinced he did nothing wrong. User Sherhatin said, I am so sorry that you and your parents had to suffer through that. It is really easy to be judging from the outside, but most don't realize how hard it is to stand up to a narcissist. Your parents did everything right raising you, because despite living with and enduring a manipulative sibling, you have turned out great. Compassionate, caring, and responsible. Hopefully, you and your parents can recover from that as a family and enjoy being together for a long time to come. As for your brother, he can go kick rocks. May his beer always be stale and sauce never cling to his pasta. Under this comment, another user said, I was thinking narcissist too. They normally have no problems taking money or cheating people and end up getting their way due to their charm or pity. I consider myself a fairly smart person, but ended up with one for 5 years and am in debt now. Had to get a nice apartment for us, had to cover the rent, my cash started missing. Eventually, after all that, it was physical abuse that finally was the straw that broke the camel's back, not the money. Anyway, narcissists get what they deserve, but in their mind, they always deserve the best. User Santa did 911 said, it's crazy how two people from the same environment can turn out so differently. Under this comment, OP said the following, honestly, that's what confuses me the most out of the whole thing. I know how he was raised because I was raised the same way. Both my parents came from really disadvantaged backgrounds and made something of themselves. They taught us the value of hard work. He is virtually everything my parents taught us not to be. User IkeBit said, having illnesses and or disabilities and being a douche don't contradict. An asshole becoming sick is now a sick asshole. I'm glad you found your own life and have a good relationship with your parents. Continue to stay away from assholes, family or otherwise. This next post was made in the relationship advice subreddit by a throwaway account. The post is titled, I am 30F and my 33-year-old husband accused me of murder out of the blue. How do I salvage this? This is long and ridiculous. Sorry, my husband Luke had a sister Laura. We were all close and saw each other 2 to 3 times a month along with their parents. Almost 6 months ago, Laura fell down the stairs at their family home and died. It was a freak accident. There's a window on the half landing and she hit her head on the sill. I was the last person to see her. I was there for less than 10 minutes and she was in her pajamas making coffee. I didn't even stay for a drink, and I struggle with how such a brief and meaningless interaction could have been her last. She deserved so much more. My husband and I have only been married for a year, but we've been together for 4 and have known each other for 20 plus. When Laura's parents found her, they called my husband straight away and we rushed over. We faced the whole thing as a family. In the days after, Luke started quizzing me, exactly what we talked about, what she was wearing, where we were standing, etc. It progressed to saying I was providing conflicting information on tiny details he was deliberately misunderstanding, and accusing me of withholding information because I couldn't tell him things like what pajamas she was wearing. This escalated quickly but lasted for less than a week as I lost my cool and made it clear that I was done answering questions. He didn't bring it up again and I wrote it off as a grief quirk. His behavior was generally that of a normal grieving person. Last Friday, he outright accused me of murdering her in front of his parents out of the blue. We were all stunned. There was an inquest which recently concluded and there was never any doubt the verdict would be accidental death. He said it was completely obvious and he couldn't believe that no one else could see it. He claims I went through his phone and found his messages with Laura. I have absolutely no idea what messages he's talking about. I have never looked at his phone, and that I went over to confront her and things got out of hand and I pushed her downstairs. By the end, he was shouting about going to the police and getting the inquest overturned and how I wasn't going to get away with it. Let me be clear, Laura and I had a great relationship. We all did. I have no idea where this has come from other than these messages I haven't seen, and even then, I don't think there's anything I could ever see on someone's phone that would drive me to murder. It's just ridiculous. He's been with his parents since this happened and will not talk to me at all. I've had some contact with his mom, but she's not being very communicative. The last I heard, she didn't know what messages he was referring to either. I am still completely stunned and I have no idea how to proceed. I made a commitment to be there for him always, and I understand that grief can manifest in strange ways, but part of me feels like my love for him died the second he called me a murderer, and I don't know how we could possibly work through this. I also really don't want to be thought of in this way, and I have no idea if he has said anything to people we know. I obviously haven't. A brain tumor or psychotic break has crossed my mind, and I suggested it to his mother and she just said she'll talk to him. Other than the questions before, he hasn't been acting odd. Obviously, he's been grieving, but he seemed sane and sensible other than this. I feel like I'm going mad. Does anyone have any advice at all? TLDR, my husband's sister died in a horrible accident, and my husband, for absolutely no reason other than some mystery messages, thinks I murdered her. User MoralTac said, "Fuck no, you don't salvage this, you get a lawyer and get the fuck out." Best case scenario, he has just admitted to sending messages with his sister that he thinks would make you angry enough to kill her over them. I have some ideas about what those might be, and they're all bad. How did the parents react when he did this? Under this comment, OP said, when he first laid out the accusation at his parents' house, both his mother and I just kept asking him about the messages, and all he would say was that I know exactly what messages he was talking about. She was as stunned as me, and his father just said he didn't understand what he was talking about. He's a man of few words, but there was plenty of head shaking. The whole thing was surreal. No one knew how to react. I honestly don't know what kind of lawyer I would even speak to about this. From what I'm aware, the coroner's decision can't be appealed, and the police can't launch an investigation into an accidental death. I don't think I'm quite ready for divorce. We haven't spoken since his accusation, and I walked out about 5 minutes after he threw it out, and I have no idea what his frame of mind is. User WonderfulPrior381 said, you need to get a lawyer to protect yourself in case he goes to the police. I would write down everything you can remember that happened that day and keep it just in case. He may be having a psychotic break. As stated, don't talk to him, his immediate family, or your friends without someone present, or preferably by text or email. Save everything. You need to take his accusations seriously and cover your ass. To this comment, OP said the following: I was interviewed by the coroner's office after her death as I was the last person to see her. She died about 3 hours after I saw her, and I'd been to the supermarket and was home by that point. It's all verifiable and was a recorded interview. I haven't spoken to anyone but his mother, and that's only been over messages. She's never been a big texter, but she has seemed very cagey over the past few days. I don't know if this means she's seen the messages. I've asked and been ignored. The very next day, OP gave us an update. I'm in a bizarre and complex situation with my husband. I have broken the law and I feel I have no choice but to do so again for my safety. I don't know what type of solicitor I need or what the next steps should look like. We're in England and I'll try not to editorialize too much. My husband's sister died suddenly at the start of the year. Her death was an accident and there was no suggestion to the contrary. The inquest was recently concluded and a verdict of accidental death was returned. I was the last person to see her, but her time of death, which was almost immediate due to her injury, was confirmed to be hours after I had left the house. All of this was verified at the time. In the immediate aftermath, my husband behaved strangely and kept trying to trip up my story of the last time we saw each other, which was a brief interaction. Last week, months after this was first and last mentioned, he outright accused me of murder in front of his parents. He says I saw his messages with his sister and confronted her, and that he's going to have the coroner's decision overturned and have the police investigate. I haven't seen or heard from him since. Today is day 9. I posted for advice on Reddit. I am pretty desperate at this point, and it has spooked me, quite reasonably I think, but also led to me committing a crime and planning another. My husband's iCloud credentials were saved on an old iPad in his office, and I downloaded his backup last night. I have read all of his messages with his sister, and there is absolutely nothing like he describes. I understand this is illegal, and I'm concerned about the possible ramifications. I am also waiting for a callback from a locksmith to change the locks on the home we own together, which I believe is also against the law. So this leads to my actual questions. I feel justified in what I've done for my safety, but is there a degree of pragmatism under the law for these issues because of the situation, or am I shooting myself in the foot? I am resigned to the fact my relationship is over, but his parents don't seem to be taking this seriously and they're icing me out. I believe this is a serious mental health issue which may put people, namely me, at risk. Can I do anything about this when all I have is the fact I'm being accused of murder? I feel he needs to be detained and this should be investigated as a full-blown psychotic break. Sorry, this is all a bit mental. In addition, what type of solicitor do I need? My understanding is that a coroner's decision can't be appealed. Is that correct? Are his accusations going to go anywhere? Can I protect myself from this or stop him escalating to telling others? We live in our hometown and everyone knows everyone. This could follow me forever and it's either a lie or a delusion. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. User NoFirefighter9257 said, you are jumping ahead of yourself and playing out situations that have not occurred. If your husband reports you to the police for accessing his data and you are subsequently arrested or taken in for questioning, then obtain the services of a criminal solicitor for advice. With respect to changing locks or ending your marriage, seek a solicitor that deals with family law and divorce. If you feel that you are at risk from your husband, talk to a domestic abuse helpline. If you feel you are at an immediate risk of harm, then call the police. If you think your husband is mentally ill and presents a risk to himself or others, call the police. Under this comment, OP said, "I don't think that's a fair assessment. Being accused of arguably the most serious crime to exist has most definitely occurred. My understanding of the law is that something is illegal whether you are reported to the police or not. Those messages are evidence as far as I'm concerned that his accusations are false. They were apparently the trigger to me literally murdering someone I was extremely close to. I have illegally accessed them, and I don't think it's unreasonable to inquire as to the potential impact of that. I am fully aware that I need a solicitor, but as you're probably aware, today is Sunday. I don't know if I need to seek someone out based on a divorce, which honestly, if this is a mental health issue, is not going to be something I go for, or a criminal solicitor, or someone who deals with the Mental Health Act, as my absolute priority preference is getting him assessed. My only exposure to the legal system in my entire life was through the inquest, and that is obviously completely different to any of this. I'm not educated in this area." About 1 week later, OP gave us another update. "Firstly, thank you to those who helped me get to my husband's iCloud backups through an old iPad. I wasn't expecting much from Reddit, but I got valuable practical advice before my post was locked, and I appreciate it. There were no crazy or even suspicious messages. I've searched for over 100 terms and scrolled back over years. I saw a side of them both I wasn't expecting, but nothing that explains the claim I murdered Laura over their chats. Nothing to suggest he was cheating, absolutely nothing to suggest incest. I repeat, no incest. No weird gaps where deleted conversations or a switch to another app would fit. Just siblings making plans, sending memes, and gossiping. They said unexpectedly horrible stuff about a few people, but not me. It was a sort of relief, but it raised more questions than it answered. I sought legal advice also from Reddit after posting here. Turns out my options are divorce him or sit down. I contacted my community mental health team who said they'd reach out, but made it clear it wasn't urgent. I then called his mom and said that if I didn't hear from him by this weekend, I would get a solicitor and ask for a mental health assessment as part of the divorce. In response, he made a ridiculous post to Facebook, which neither of us has used in years, and everything blew up. I'm going to try to keep this succinct. On Friday night, he made a long accusation on Facebook with new information. He said he'd been planning to leave me for months with his sister's support, and I found the messages and murdered her. The coroner has reopened the case, and the police are preparing to arrest me, and he needs to make sure people know before the trial stops him talking about it. It was well written and seemed vaguely plausible. He messaged people links, so it got some attention. We live in our hometown and have a large circle of friends because we've been here all our lives. People I haven't spoken to since school were reaching out to me asking what was going on. It was madness. In response, I posted the export of his entire conversation history with Laura, also to Facebook when I finally got back in. I linked to the chat along with a post explaining my side and noting that I had changed my ex's iCloud and Apple passwords and that if he wanted them back, he should comment on my post and update his own, admitting that he was lying. He eventually did. When I started getting messages about his post, I panicked, and changing his password seemed important to preserve everything because he'd know I had access. When I spoke to him the next morning, it's clear he's not having a mental episode at all, but is claiming one because he's been caught in a big lie. As soon as he was outed, he called me, clearly drunk, begging and promising to explain everything if I deleted my post. I hung up and told him to call back the next day. He did, after many missed calls and texts, and he tried to bargain and guilt trip me with his mental health until it was clear the wrong people had seen his conversation. It's hard to describe, but it seemed fake. It was too well rehearsed, and then this morning, when it was clear he was getting nowhere, he blocked me. Begging for mercy and reciting facts about mental disorders doesn't align with someone in crisis with a sincere belief that someone murdered their sibling. The question of why he did all this remains unanswered, and he will not be getting his passwords until it is. The legal advice subreddit said, "This stuff is technically illegal, but it's beneath a court to take action." So I'm going to count on that because I felt like I had no other choice at the time, and now I don't see any other way to get answers from him. I am desperate, and it's all I've got. So there we are. The relationship I have believed was my destiny since I was a teenager has boiled down to petty, convoluted, and vindictive bullshit, played out on social media for reasons still unknown. My hope for a brain tumor is fading, and clearly, tomorrow morning is going to be when I lawyer up and stop posting about this. I am mortified. I have no idea whether some people might believe him, and I still don't know why this all happened in the first place. Sorry I don't have a happier update, and thanks once again to everyone who offered advice. User Sacred and Bound said, I'd be worried about my safety. The husband has clearly lost the plot and might try to do something crazy. OP is also not thinking straight, but given the situation, I'm not surprised. User Existential Chaos said, this honestly is nuts. I hope it's down to a psychotic break and he needs something to blame because there wasn't a reason for his sister's death. It was just an accident, and I didn't kill her to cover up some shady incest affair or something. I watch too much crime TV. If it's the psychotic break, I hope he can get the help he needs, but getting sectioned in the UK is so difficult, and even then there is a lack of beds for patients because the NHS is User Forsaken Woodpecker 1 said, I personally am noticing that OP seems to be getting further and further into a spiral and is repeating things without seeming to accept that anything needs to actually be done to have things happen. Asking about what kind of a lawyer, I mean, how many times does that need to be asked? Honestly, I'm wondering about her mental state and how elastic it's become. The part about her in-laws icing her out is odd. Imagine you have two adult children, one dies in a sudden and tragic accident, the other starts accusing his wife of murder to your utter astonishment. He claims to have steadily exchanged emails and texts with his sister that would incite his own wife to murder your daughter. You think he might be having a mental break. Your DIL agrees. You're struggling with the loss of one kid, and now you might be fighting the loss of the second. What would cause his parents to stop the line of thought that he might have a life-threatening condition? User Arsenal Kate said, why does she think accessing her husband's iPad in their home is illegal? She keeps saying she committed a crime by downloading the messages, but how would that even be criminal? It's not like she stole the device or broke in, she had the password. Under this comment, user Witch King of Bryn Mawr said, yeah, her fixation on her own crimes is by far the oddest part of this. Like, have you ever interacted with law enforcement lady? Maybe it's super different in the UK, but nobody is getting prosecuted for reading her husband's text messages. There's no harm besides a very narrow, targeted invasion of your spouse's privacy, which was done with his best interests at heart and using credentials he provided to her at some point. If this was actionable, I'd be able to report at least half a dozen exes who snooped through my phone because they thought I overtipped a waitress, had a couple of drinks with dinner, and were experiencing peak menstrual cycle hormones. Changing the locks on your own home is a civil matter. Cops might assist, but she won't be detained. Hell, if she tells the cops what happened and he starts ranting like a lunatic, he might end up cooling off in the car while they figure out what to do. So weird. User Thurber's Microscope said, my sister-in-law accused me of murder after my husband died in 2016. It was months of extra stress and grief, and the police dropped by to search my house. Eventually, the police had enough of her calls and told her to stop. There was no evidence of anything other than a man choosing the wrong way out. Grief can completely break someone's brain.